It's an icon of the Old South. It's palpable. I mean, it's got the oak trees, the Spanish moss, the belvedered mansions. It's got all the images of the Old South. And then you have a historical aesthetic. You have 500 years of history that's really here. You have lots of American history that actually began here. And you have the icons, the artifacts of that history visible to you all over the place. And I think that the total effect of that is what strikes people. In fact, I know it's what strikes people because I've got 300 years of commentary that I can roll out.
Already they are starting to call Americans rebels. Where this will lead, I cannot say.
So Beaufort started out with a sort of checkered political loyalties. The older generation were generally loyalists like Colonel Nathaniel Barnwell and Colonel Daniel Hayward. And their sons, John Barnwell, who was a general in the Revolution, and Thomas Hayward Jr., who signed the Declaration of Independence, they were patriots. But Beaufort suffered in the war because Beaufort was occupied by the British for 2 years during that time. And what happened in Beaufort was an internecine warfare. A lot of property was burned and destroyed. And a lot of people, a high percentage of people were killed during the war. So it was a very destructive war in the Beaufort district and in South Carolina in general. After the American Revolution, this place was quite depressed, and the commentators mentioned it. Burned out plantations, burned out churches, people were discouraged. The rice industry is very expensive, and they didn't have the capital to rebuild it. And it destroyed the indigo, which was the second largest product here. Indigo was bought by British textile merchants, and they didn't buy it after the American Revolution. The indigo industry during the Revolution moved to India and never came back. So there was quite a deep, sharp depression and after the war. And what brought South Carolina out of the Depression began in Beaufort, and it was the introduction of cotton. The beginning of the Industrial Revolution, one of the first applications of the steam engine to industry in the world was in Great Britain when they created the steam-powered loom. And all of a sudden they had the industrial capacity to weave cloth. The only thing they didn't have was enough fiber. So they looked around the world for fiber, and what did they find? They found cotton. And in 1790, William Elliott planted the first commercial crop of Sea Island cotton at Myrtle Bank Plantation on Hilton Head Island. So these folks in Beaufort, these planters who were impoverished by the war, all of a sudden had the opportunity to get rich again, and they did. A lot of the old houses in Beaufort were built as a consequence of that first cotton boom. They also started their educational institutions, educated their children in town. And the building that we're sitting in, the old Beaufort College, was founded in 1795 as a consequence of that first cotton boom.
You have long lingered and hoped over the shattered remains of a broken Constitution. Compromise after compromise formed by your concessions has been trampled underfoot by your Northern Confederates.
Edmund Rhett was at one time the mayor of Beaufort, and he and his brother Robert Barnwell Rhett, who lives down on the next block at what is the Rhett House Inn, had lots of meetings here in the East Room of Secession House to talk up seceding from the Union. The actual ordinance of secession was written in Charleston, but many, many meetings were held here, and that's why it is known as the Secession House.
By the time of the Civil War, they were in their third generation of great wealth. So they had a lot to defend, and they were proud and eager in its defense. And so they led the secession movement. They seceded But then they fired on Fort Sumter, which clearly was not a good idea, because that led to the Civil War, which totally transformed the American South.
Whole fort is on fire. The stars and stripes will wave defiantly amongst the smoke and flames. We admire Anderson for his pluck, but let fly our shot and shell with a will.
Our Southern brethren have done grievously. They have rebelled and have attacked their father's house and their loyal brothers. They must be punished and brought back, but this necessity breaks my heart.
Beaufort, ironically, the place where secession began, was the first Southern city conquered by Union forces. The U.S. Navy steamed into Port Royal Sound, blew up the Confederate forts, and seized the Sea Islands. And Beaufort and the Sea Islands became an enclave of Union occupation throughout the war.
On the plaster walls are lead writings of what was going on during the Civil War. Secession House lower level was used as a paymaster department. Also on the plaster walls is a some documented script which says this is Edmund Rhett's house. He had 42 field hands and 12 horses. In this house, the first meeting in favor of secession was held. You will also see graffiti which says Union Forever, some signatures by the soldiers, some profiles, drawings. And on another wall in Secession House, you will see signatures of soldiers from a regiment in Berks County, Pennsylvania. These soldiers occupied the house during the Civil War. The owners, of course, had left Beaufort and gone inland.
So an awful lot of the Beaufort planters who were in town packed up everything they could pack up, threw it aboard the steamboat, and went to Charleston. And when they arrived in Charleston, all the Charlestonians said, well, did you burn the town? Because they expected to burn the town and the cotton before they left. And the Beaufortonians said, no, we didn't burn the town. And there was a dispute between the Charleston Confederates and the Beaufort Confederates about why they didn't burn the town. But they didn't burn the town. And when the Yankees arrived, they found the place intact, and they employed it intact as a convalescent center, primarily. Beaufort was mostly a hospital.
The heart and the soul of Reconstruction occurred right here between St. Helena and Beaufort County. This is the heart of Reconstruction. Penn School came in existence because more or less there were a very large number of abolitionists that were with the federal troops. And one of the things that they wanted to prove or disprove the fallacy where these newly freed slaves could be self-sufficient. So they started what was called the Port Royal experiment. When the Union Army invaded St. Helena Island, they immediately set all 10,000 of the slaves free. They emancipated them several years before the official reading of the Emancipation Proclamation. And doing that, one of the things that these newly freed slaves did, some joined the Army, and others built fortification against the continuous attack from the Confederate troops from Port Royal Island. Not only did the federal government provide emancipation and freedom for the newly freed slaves, they allowed them to purchase land. So they basically divided a lot of 55 plantations, or most of them, except one on St. Helena Island, into 40-acre parcels. They had the opportunity to not only own land, but they could work their land. They could make profit from farming on their land. So now they were freed people who had some resources. The instructors of Penn School, who came after Laura Tong and Ellen Murray, also taught them regarding government. They taught them skills so they could become part of the government itself. They served on various boards and council, and even many of them got elected to Congress. One of the main person that is common to us is Robert Smalls, who served about 3 terms.
Robert Smalls was a great war hero. He had gained his own freedom by seizing a ship, the Planter, out of Charleston Harbor and delivering it to the Union blockading squadron. He became a celebrity. He was a very capable mariner, and he became a natural leader. And they organized the Republican Party around Robert Smalls and his friends in 1867. The first organization of the Republican Party in South Carolina was on Bay Street, Beaufort, South Carolina, in March of 1867. And they changed the constitution of the state, they took over the government of the state, and they brought industry to the state. This is hard for people to imagine, but in 1883, this harbor, called the Port of Beaufort, was the 10th largest exporting port in the United States, with cotton, lumber, and phosphate. Many of the leading merchants who stayed in Beaufort were not Southerners. They were Northerners. Some Southern families returned, mostly as professionals. They were very well educated, so they were doctors and lawyers. And they returned to ply those professions. And Beaufort prospered mightily during the decades following the Civil War. Unlike other Southern communities that depended solely on agriculture, Beaufort prospered. It was the first city of the New South. Black politicians, white merchants, industry, commerce, shipping, it had everything. Well, and the prosperity of the Reconstruction era did not last. Beaufort suffered several economic setbacks in the 1890s. The first was a colossal natural disaster, was the Sea Island hurricane of 1893.
The Sea Islands that lie between that city and Charleston were exposed to the full fury of the tempest, and the winds fell upon them as if trying to tear the earth asunder.
2,000 people were killed between Savannah and Charleston. It's one of the largest natural disasters in terms of lives lost in American history. It destroyed the phosphate fleet. It sank. Most of the phosphate was dug up from the river bottoms by great dredges and towed around by tugboats on barges. And all those were sunk. The tugboats, the barges, the dredges, everything was lost. The other thing that happened was that cotton prices declined in the 1890s. And then in 1901, they took the naval station away. The naval station moved to Charleston in 1901, became the naval shipyard, Charleston Naval Shipyard. So Beaufort County went into a long depression. And Beaufort County had a moment of prosperity in World War I when they opened the Marine Corps Recruit Depot on Parris Island, and thank God for the Marines. During World War II, there were 241,000 Marines trained on Parris Island, and there were only 21,000 people living in all of Beaufort County. 10 times the population of Beaufort County went through Parris Island during World War II. Yamasee was one of the busiest railroad stations in the United States, with Marines, sailors, airmen going to the 8th Air Force in Savannah, and I mean, you name it. It was just booming because of World War II. And it hasn't stopped. Beaufort is naturally preserved. And so people who found this place, one-lane bridge built in 1908, who came across that bridge and found Beaufort, said, "Ah, look, it's history preserved, you know, it's history forgotten." So you have this unusually romantic aesthetic that just strikes people. And it's not just the visuals, it's actually the tactile feeling. Because you come here, you smell the ocean, you smell the marshes. And then all of a sudden you see oysters the size of your hand, you know. I mean, all these things just affect people. They're things that don't exist anyplace else in the United States.